What does that mean?
Today's episode is brought to you by elitefts.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. What's going on, guys? We are back. As always, I want to start by thanking our sponsors. Today's sponsor for the show is powerrackstrength.com. When they originally set up their sponsorship deal for the show, they wanted to run with their CBD, which I will talk about at a later time, but I wanted to pivot on this because powerrackstrength.com is owned by Brian Carroll. They also have a consulting service, and what I want to talk about is at this past weekend Swiss Symposium, Brian's room was packed. I mean, it was standing room only, which shows you, and we can talk about back stuff as we kind of go through the podcast here. It shows you how many people are dealing with low back pain from all ends of the spectrum, from high lifters all the way down to just broad-based lifters. Brian is one of only a handful of Stu McGill's practitioners, which Stu is very selective on who he's going to certify as a practitioner, and Brian is one. So I wanted to pivot this and talk more about his consulting program that you can, or consulting service that you can find at powerrackstrength.com, and his book, The Gift of Injury, which will tell you his story. Brian's unique in the way that, you're dealing with a guy that was squatting over 1,000 pounds for years and years and years, up into the 1,200 pound, 1,175, whatever range, and then has to take time off, and work with Stu to be able to fix his back. And I'll still say, even though this is kind of like an advert for him, the most impressive thing that I think he did through that whole process is not train it off for 3 to 4 months to be able to let the spine actually heal. And all this is documented and laid out in his book in an easy to read format. I'm going to say that again, in an easy to read format. And I'm only saying that because right now I'm ripping on the friends of mine that can't read a freaking book that's 120 pages with no words that are really written above the 5th grade level. So the only reason why they're not reading it is because they're too lazy and they just want somebody to tell them what to do, which you can do that, I guess, if you call Brian and set up the appointment to do the consulting for that. So again, guys, that's powerrackstrength.com. The book is Gift of Injury. The second sponsor I wanted to call out is elitefts.com, obviously. We just launched yesterday our Better Than Black Friday offers. They start in November. They're going to run all the way through the month. It is actually what I'm saying it is. So the offers that you're going to see on these select items or categories of items from now until Black Friday will be put at prices that are going to be lower than Black Friday. I'm not saying they're not going to be on sale on Black Friday. They will, but they're not going to be on sale at the same price rate. This does a few things. It helps our more loyal customers take advantage of the best deals without running into stock out issues. It also kind of lowers our load of orders that are going to come through in a 3-day period of time and spreads it out more over the month. Right now, those offers are on the bench blocks, the cambered neutral grip pressing bar, and the garage power rack. More than likely, this will change on Friday. So subscribe to our newsletter to be able to stay up to date with that. Click the link in the bio, go to the website, and the bio for Brian's stuff is in the description as well. And instead of keep going on with the sponsors, because I'm sure Merrick Health will come up at some point in time, I want to thank Merrick Health as well, merrickhealth.com/table talk, and Element, drinkelement.com, drinklmnt.com/table talk. Get a free sample pack with every order. On to the guest today, which is Dr. Tate Willsey. I've known of him and him of I for all the way back to 2009 when he was working with Buddy Morris at Pitt. And a few years ago, I don't want to name the situation that might have caused us to start communicating back and forth with each other, but and it was pre-COVID, and he reached out to me and it was like, hey, I'd like to come out and do some content. Basically it was do content, but also kind of help with some of the issues that I was
Crack
dealing
a hard case.
Yes, yes, yes. And it was on the back end of something else that we were kind of doing at the time. So it was like, now this would be cool to do. And then life happens, COVID happens, everything gets busy. So we were able to finally hook up, which is great. His bio, to keep this really brief, is he's a doctor of physical therapy, but also has a strong background in strength and conditioning. I was joking a little bit earlier because he has a fairly large following on Instagram, and it's rare to find somebody that has a large following on Instagram but actually has a practice, that does their stuff. And it's also rare to find a DPT or a doctor of physical therapy that also is well astute in strength and conditioning. It's easy to find the strength and conditioning coach that thinks they're a physical therapist, or the physical therapist that thinks they're a strength and conditioning coach. But it's going to be an interesting conversation because you blend both fields and you actually are doing work, in both fields with your facility, because you also, as I said, has a facility with staff, which changes dynamics too, instead of just being your own place in your basement. So is there anything with your bio or your history that I left out that's of any importance?
That covers it, man. I'm a unimpressive former power lifter, and I've just kind of stayed under the bar, so to speak, for my entire life since I got introduced to it in my early teenage years. And yeah.
Let's get into that. How did you get introduced to it?
High school football.
Oh, yeah.
But even before that, I was too heavy to play the Pop Warner, 8th grade football, but I knew I wanted to play in high school. And so I just started lifting weights. And the way that our setup was you walk from the middle school to the high school, and that's where the coaches introduce you as 7th and 8th graders to the weight room, and they kind of scout out who they want to, play football, who they want to kind of groom, so to speak. And so it just kind of came naturally to me. I think I worked up to 135 one of the first times I ever bench pressed, and it was just kind of like, hey, this is fun. I like this, and I love the feeling. And fast forward 25 years, it's the Zen space, man. It's the escape that I have. Not that I need to escape my life, but it's the escape that I have that's like my time, and I just love it, and I value it more than most things. And I've trained and logged my training and just been deep into that world for 20 plus years.
So was your junior high was set up just being 7th and 8th?
6th, 7th, and 8th.
6th, 7th, and 8th.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
because mine was 7th and 8th, which was mine was 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
Which was kind of weird because then you're kind of like in high school, but you're not in high school. I asked because when you're playing sports, it's always this weird transition because it seems like you're either there too soon or there too late.
Yeah.
So when I was in 9th grade in junior high, I remember being bussed out, to be able to practice with the varsity.
Yeah.
Right, and then the junior high kind of doesn't like you because you're not with them.
Yeah, the subtle varsity flex.
Yeah, but it's not often that I hear I weighed too much to be able to play.
Yeah.
So how did that work? Was
in
that
middle,
just
I was interested in playing football, but this wasn't through the school. This was just kind of the private league. Ours is called Maplewood in the DC area, and they just had weight limitations. And I was one of those kids that was like, I'm 6 foot now, and I was like 5'10" in 6th grade. I grew early. Maybe not 6th grade, but I grew early, and I was big then, and so I just I was too heavy for those leagues. I can't remember what the weight limit was, but it was like 150 pounds or something like that.
And then you played all through high school?
Yeah.
And did that continue into college then?
No. I actually what got me into interested in physical therapy was I had shoulder injuries. I dislocated my shoulder when I was a freshman in high school, and then I did it again when I was a senior. Ended up having labrum surgery, and at the time I just decided I wasn't a Division I player. I could have played D3, but I decided, you know what, I want to pursue academics and social life. And so I decided to not play in college.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was one of those things that I thought a lot about in my early 20s because I had a lot of good buddies that played, and I loved the sport of football. But I unfortunately, my labrum surgery didn't go that well, and I've kind of had shoulder issues on and off since I was 17 years old. And so I've had 2 more surgeries since then. Similar story to what you were told in your late 30s about having, that's where I am now, like arthritis, chondromalacia. I had the most recent surgery was just a cleanup because it felt like shit for 2 years after the second labrum repair that I had. And so, yeah, that, I think that sidelined me, so to speak. And it's been a big part of what's driven me to learn a lot about the physical therapy world.
I was going to say, was that part of, so when you went into college, did you know which, most don't, did you kind of know what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I had an idea. Yeah, and I was kind of a math science guy. So I knew I wanted to be in something in exercise. I ended up majoring in exercise science, and that was then I went to Pitt, and so that was how I got connected with Buddy and James. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting, right? Because Buddy and James look at things through a very, I don't want to say orthopedic lens, but a very physical therapy type lens.
That was kind of my initial motivation of like, whoa, I can do, this doesn't always have to be siloed. Like we can do a little bit of both. Buddy would have his guys with hamstring strains doing sled drag sprints, reducing the angular velocity of the hip and the knee, reducing demand on the hamstring, slowing them down a little bit. He would have his ACLs 3 or 4 months post-op. They're working with him, and so he was able to really and I was like, wait, these guys aren't rehabbing? And he's like, yeah, well, they are rehabbing, but they're training, and so like, obviously Charlie Weinkraft and the whole, training equals rehab and whatnot. But like that concept was introduced to me before I was, before I was in my professional career and before a lot of people were talking about it.
Yeah.
And so that got me fired up. And that was kind of I would say, the most influential acute period of my life and the kind of the building blocks for everything I'm doing now.
Why did you, after the exercise science degree, why did you go back then for the physical therapy? Was it because of that?
I loved strength and conditioning, and stumbling into the experience with Buddy and James was completely by chance.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I had sought them out. I had already been reading. I actually didn't know that the Thinker and Coach X were Buddy and James, but I had been in that.
We had to try to hide that because of compliance issues. Yeah,
absolutely. And but I had been in that world for a few years, and a friend of mine that had done the internship with them the year before was like, "You got to get in with these guys," And so I fell in love with strength and conditioning at that point, and I said, you know what, this is what I want to do. And so the original plan was to go straight through to PT. But then I ended up being a strength coach for almost 4 years before I went back to physical therapy.
Yeah.
And it was, to be honest with you, I was working in the private sector. I was dating my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I didn't want to do the college strength and conditioning, move all around the country, sacrifice quality of life, which so many of my friends did, and half of them are either out of the industry or the other half kind of rise to the top and are in good Division I or pro spots. That was kind of that seemed like kind of the path. It's a tough career to go into. And I knew that at a young age, and I was also pursuing my relationship. And so I was in the private sector, and I got to a point where it's like, private sector hours, you're seeing people early, you're seeing people late, you're picking your nose in the middle of the day. And it was like this, and I was like, you know what, I already have everything, like my prerequisites to go to physical therapy school. Let's go, let's do this. And so I just started applying, and that was the next, it just seemed like the next logical step for me. But I was carving out a career for myself as a private sector strength coach, and I loved it.
Yeah. So so now you graduate, and then what was your first job as
it was
the
a
physical
shitty,
therapist?
It was a good experience. It's like get your hands on everybody, but it was a shitty insurance-based practice. I don't have to. I can say anything I want because these guys.
You can say anything.
These guys aren't listening to this podcast.
Yes.
But it was my boss sat me down when I was like 6 months in, and he said, "Do you want to be a personal?" He said, "You still think you're a personal trainer?" And it was because I thought that I should load people, and that if people had movement-based goals, they shouldn't be getting massages the entire time. And I was kind of exposed to like pain science and these ideas of talking to people a little bit. And I was doing things differently than what my boss, who thought he wanted to be, he thought he was a mentor to me, and I thought he was going to be, but he just wasn't, you know, it wasn't the right fit. So I did that for a year, and then I joined up with the crew at Healthy Baller, which is, you know, the rest is history. I've been there. We're on year 7 now. And I literally said to them, can I throw a table in the back of your weight room? And I pointed right next to the last squat rack. I said, right there. And they were like, all right, fine. I mean, it didn't cost them a dime to let me open up a practice there. And so I practice out of network. It's a cash-based service. You know, we give people insurance reimbursement if they want it. But yeah, you're familiar with the model. And so, you know, fast forward 7 years, I joined up with them when they were less than a year old at the time.
Yeah.
And we've opened up a second location. We expanded the first one from 6 to 12,000 square feet. I've got 7 physical therapists on staff, plus myself. And then, you know, I've also got other people that work with me in kind of the online world and what I do there. And so it's all kind of happened together. And like the online stuff, I started that because I was slow as shit right when I started my own PT practice. I was like, I'm just going to start posting. I'm going to start, you know, doing this thing. And it was right when Instagram switched from from photos to videos. And it was like, you know, good place, good time. Kind of, you got to get a little lucky sometimes. Yeah. You know, and it all kind of came together that way. And we were talking about networking and the idea of networking at conferences. And, you know, I had gone to, I went to CVAS before I was in physical therapy school. Like, and so I had been in this world, and I had met people. And so like, I just started to kind of reach out to people that I respected in the industry as my followership started to grow. And I said, oh, maybe I just said, hey, look, I just want you to know I've read your stuff for years. I respect it. You know, I don't know if you recall, but many years ago I posted a photo of all of the Elite FTS shirts and tank tops that I had. Yeah. And I spread them out on my bed like a freak and took a photo of like 15 of them. And I was like, holy shit, Dave Tate's following me. And and I have all of this gear of his, and like, you know, and it was like just ridiculous to me that like it had risen to that level. But I was like, wow, I'm actually kind of reaching people with this. And so
it's
like,
I want to step back, because I think this can help the people who are listening, is when you're dealing with private pay and the insurance pay, you know, it's, man, and I learned this when I was still competing. So we're going back, you know, to 2004 and stuff like that. It didn't take me very long to figure out that, I'm trying to think of how, I don't think it really matters how I say it, right? That the insurance physical therapy model sucked, right? And I kind of had some clues that it sucked when the surgeons themselves were kind of saying, well, you can if you want to, but you really just need to do this. Yeah. I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. And then I would go and then have weird shit happen. Like, you know, here's the bill, and you're being billed for upper back, lower back, and shoulder. And I'm like, but I was only there for my pec. Yeah. You know, and just crazy shit like that. And then there's a limit to the number of times you get 6 visits. And I'm like, this is bullshit. You know, and then the insurance just keeps paying less and less and less and less anyhow. Yeah. And then when the person I was seeing at the time left, you know, to go into private practice, I think more so at the time to be able to do more ART, maybe MAT, different modalities that were, he felt handcuffed that he couldn't do.
Yeah, those take longer, and you need that increase exposure time with your therapist. Yeah, and it's than be passed off.
Yeah, so then he flipped it, and it sucks that when you're broke, it kind of sucks. You're like, oh, this sucks. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, well, I still have this deductible I have to reach, and it doesn't really matter how I reach that deductible as long as I have this receipt. And if each time I go in there, it's, you know, $100 receipt or $150 or whatever it was at the time, that's just getting me closer to my deductible. So by the time I send it in there and really fuck myself up, you know, I'm already going to have to cover, I've already covered my deductible, you know, for that time period. And since then, moving forward now 2 decades, I won't see somebody that's not private pay. I mean, it sounds really fucked up to kind of say, but the way that I kind of see that is that tells me one of 2 things. Please correct me if anything I say here is like not legal to say, but fuck it, it's my podcast, right? is it tells me one of two things. Either they're just started and they don't know what they're doing, and they're learning under somebody else who probably isn't there to oversee the time that they're going to be with me, right? Or they're not good enough to be in demand.
Right.
Because if they were in demand, they wouldn't be paying X amount.
Right.
Just so those people know, the physical therapists don't make what you see being billed.
Yeah.
You know, it's a fraction of that.
The negotiated rate of the medical system's a complete farce.
Yeah. So when you find somebody and they're like, look, I'm only private pay, then you're like, okay, when can I see you? And then it's like, well, my next appointment's 2, 3, 4 weeks out. They're really, really good. But then I'll say, find a way to negotiate a sooner time. Like, look, man, if you get a cancellation, I'm only 2 hours away, because people do still cancel.
Yeah.
And then you can get in sooner. That's what I would do. That's just my advice when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you can find somebody, like yourself, that's also astute in strength and conditioning, there's conversations that you can have.
Absolutely.
That kind of lend into all this. So getting back to your story, that was kind of, I think it's important. Am I missing anything with that?
I'm just imagining you with your torn pec history going to a therapist that doesn't know the first thing about the bench press and can't even discuss with you modifications to your gear, to your positioning, how to get you out of shoulder extension, talk to you about squat position, everything that impacts your pec that you're doing. If you as a physical therapist don't understand what the people's activities are, how the hell are you going to help them? Mm-hmm. You might do a very cursory overview treatment of, hey, let's do these band cable, but it's like, you're not going to really be able to advise people. And I mean, it's the same thing with strength and conditioning. You have to have a big passion for this outside of your 9 to 5 and outside of your what you learned in school in order to really be good at it. Mm-hmm. It has to be something that you are reading articles at night before bed. You're like, just maybe not your entire life, but you had to have phases in your life where you're just so deep in it.
Yes.
And that's my path. Maybe that's not the same path for everybody, but it's, and I don't expect everybody to be as passionate about this stuff as you are, as I am, mm-hmm. but it's like, you got to meet somewhere in the middle in order to really be good at these types of things. I didn't learn jack of strength and conditioning from school. I learned it from my internships and from reading and YouTube and experiences and books outside of school.
I was just having a conversation with somebody in the last week. My whole past couple of weeks is just a blur. But it was kind of on the wrong lines. What you were just saying is there's certain times in your life that certain things can become way higher priorities. And what I was telling this person is, and they were in their 20s. I'm like, look, you're in your 20s right now, and you're not married. You don't have kids. You're just kind of new to the profession. You should be spending all your time networking with other people, traveling to other people, learning from other people, reading, doing all these things, mm-hmm. because as you get older, you still have to do that. But if you don't figure out during that time period where the availability is easier, just simply how to vet the content.
Right.
Because you don't know when you're younger. I mean, you're going down all these rabbit holes, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of mistakes. Now it's different because we're like, okay, we know this rabbit hole. We're going to go. It's easier to know where to go or who to contact.
There's also a lot more shittier content now.
Exactly. So if they don't, and if they miss that window, right, then they're, to be honest, I think they're fucked. They then they're playing catch up the whole rest of their career. Yeah. And it's the same story with everybody that I've seen that's become really good at what they do. They have a 10-year period or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
That's just passion, deep dive into that. Yeah. With, in my case, with what you were talking about with the lifters not knowing, I was fortunate enough that Buddy introduced me to a guy named Michael Hope, which was, mm-hmm. A physical therapist at the time. And because there's the fringes, where I like to operate on, the stupid shit. It's like, look, I just tore this. I got a month before the meet. What do you think of this idea? Yeah. First response, I don't really like it, but I know you're going to do it. So let's talk about how to, that gets eliminated when there's a license that they have to worry, when it's not private pay, let's put it
Yeah.
that way. I mean, it's still kind of, Simon, it's still there. You don't want to do dumb shit.
And that's like a totally different side of therapy.
Yes.
Working with people that are competing.
Yes.
Because it's not as simple as like when we were communicating last night, I said one of the things that fires me up is medical practitioners that draw lines in the sand. And it's like, yeah, maybe going out and competing 4 weeks is not the best thing for your health, but if you're going to do it, I'm going to help you do it as smartly as possible.
Yes. And that's huge. So it's how would the person that's seeking the medical advice or the therapy advice know is a clue, like say they don't know at all, and then they go in. Would you say that that's one of the ways that they can determine if there is a hard flag planted? Here's what that is, to look elsewhere.
I think that it's practitioner specific, and I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but I think it's specific to the person. And then I'll be honest with you still. Like, I'll tell you what the risks are or what's at stake, but I'll also tell you, hey, look, people do this all the time and they don't get re-injured. They don't, people get through this. You talk about field athletes, nobody's out there, or lifters too. Nobody feels good when they're doing it. This is not, you reach the point of diminishing returns for health many years ago and many pounds ago. And you know what I mean? It's like, this is for that other part of your brain that you want to satisfy. And if you're going to do that, I'm still going to help you do that as much as possible.
Yeah. I'm talking more of, I'm trying to think of examples, that because I'm a washed up meathead, so I got a lot of people that are coming, ask me about a lot of different things, so I'll have somebody come to me and say, look, my chiropractor said my back is completely jacked. I should never squat or deadlift again. And you're like, and this is, who else have you spoken to?
Right.
Or actually, most of the time they won't even tell you it was a chiropractor. It was just my doctor.
Yeah.
Right, which is a very general term anymore, right? Like my doctor said.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, who's the doctor? Well, then it's, well, was it an orthopedic? Was it this? Was it this? Was it this?
Yeah.
And usually the advice is like that.
Yeah.
You can never do that again. And then they never get better, and they keep seeing the same person.
Right.
Which, to me, it's just a common sense thing, where I guess I'm just trying to expose that for the people that are listening, that if you're in this loop, look outside the loop, or, find somebody that knows the whole loop.
Yeah.
To be able to say, here's what this is, here's what this is. You may not know all the answers, right? But you can sit there and say just this one opinion.
Yeah.
Hey, hell, it may be right, but
Right.
you're not seeing anything else. What are things that you see in just your daily practice that would fall on those lines? Like, people have been told they can't do X
all the time.
Yeah. So what are some, not,
So the biggest thing that I think everybody should understand is that medical imaging, high-level medical imaging, MRIs specifically, weren't even used in practice until the 90s. And they're relatively new compared to x-rays, which have been around since like the late 1800s. And they show a level of detail and specificity that we as clinicians don't always know what to do with or what to make of. So we see tears in discs, we see herniations, we see imperfections in soft tissue in a way that we couldn't before. And those are not correlating in any sort of reliable way with how people actually feel. So famous study, they went and MRI'd, and these studies cost a lot of money because they're just prospective, but they went and MRI'd 100 people that felt fine, asymptomatic individuals, and half of them had a bunch of shit wrong with their back, herniated discs, annular tears, different in-plate fractures, and they had all of these issues. However, they were operating just fine. And so what that does is it brings into question, when you do have back pain, you go get this MRI, are those results what's causing your pain, or is it just something muscular? Is it different than what we're actually seeing on imaging? And then you see that with muscle tears too, where people are now starting to rehabilitate some muscle tears without necessarily going in there and fixing them. You know, you see with, I work with a lot of field athletes and sprinters, and you see quite often with hamstring tears, you go and MRI somebody 4 months later, you still see that tear, but they're okay and they're getting back into their sport. And so, first off, if your doctor is just making this determination or this recommendation based on a medical image, you have to understand that it's only half of the diagnostic process. The other half of it should be the clinical exam, and you should go through the process of reloading the tissue and seeing how you respond. And then you kind of lay out a algorithm, a heuristic, like what's the worst that could happen here, and are you willing to take that risk, so to speak? And a lot of people that are sitting across from me and investing in themselves, we talked about the pricing and everything, they want to take that risk. They're willing to, and it's like, okay, well, let me help you find that pathway. And I might have to change the direction a little bit if they have a specific attachment to the straight bar and they're unwilling to squat with a safety bar, but they have really crappy external rotation. I might need to be like, hey, look, let's you know, I can try to change the direction that they're going. The hardest people to help are the ones that have these emotional attachments to one specific thing that they have to do no matter what, or they are not creative enough to change things on their own. Like they just go to Orange Theory class every day.
Yeah.
And that hurts their knees. It's like, well, shit, maybe that's not the right thing for you, but I can still teach you how to exercise.
What if they have an emotional attachment to their injury? I've always had
Totally.
back pain.
Yeah, no, and that's where, you know, you have to validate that, and you have to understand that that's where that person's coming from, and you got to move slowly with that type of person.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I mentioned the term pain science, and that's where understanding more about somebody's thought processes and maybe the maladaptive beliefs that they have, or the anticipatory pain that they feel, or you know, explaining to them without telling them that it's all in their head, but explaining to them that, like, hey, look, there are other factors. Pain is an output, not a input. You know, pain is coming from your brain. If I distracted, my dad used to always say, if I said something hurt, he would say, well, you want me to hit you in the hand with a hammer? Because that would make my foot stop hurting, or whatever it is, you know? And so you have to understand that pain is an output from the brain. It's where we are dialed. It's the attentional focus that we provide that output at times can determine how much pain you're feeling, you know? And so it's not to say that the injury and whatever's going on there is not real. Like, you have shoulder pathology, I have shoulder pathology. I don't ignore my shoulder pathology, but at the same time, I understand, like, if I'm tired and beat up and I've been training hard, and I don't catastrophize it. I'm not like, oh man, I jacked up my shoulder again. I'm just like, look, these are the ebbs and flows of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Let's dig into that, because we both are kind of almost the same shoulder type of thing. So with what you just said, I call it a pivot, right? So your normal training, normal life's going along, right? And with my shoulder, it's symptomatic to a degree at all times, you know, and no way I like to argue and bitch about the scale of 1 to 10, because what's that really mean? Because unless we agree and anchor what that means, then it's an invalid conversation. But let's say to me, it's like a 2 most of the time. And then it will hit like a 5. You know, there's things that I'm going to do, you know, to pivot or moderate, just to move around.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you're kind of the same way. So if your shoulder is normal bad, right, then your life goes on as normal, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, if it starts to become somewhat symptomatic, where are the first places that you look? Just globally. I mean, are you looking at like just life stress? Are you looking at sleep patterns? What are you looking at globally first?
For me, it's training.
Yes.
Because I know that most of the aggravating factors for my shoulder are related to what I'm doing training-wise.
Yes.
You know.
And then what will you change training-wise?
So for me, I have what I would characterize as extension sensitivity. So going into a deep bench press or going into a dip, for example, brings your shoulder into a ton of extension. That right there, I can feel it in the front of my shoulder already. And so floor press is tremendous for my shoulder. I have you pub the Elite FTS Cambridge Swiss bar. Mm-hmm. I have one of those. You know, it's a great bar for my shoulder. I'll take that thing off the floor sometimes, and that's a nice shoulder-friendly press. I also have kind of given up overhead pressing. As I mentioned, I had shoulder issues in my early 20s. Buddy is not a big proponent
Not
of
at
overhead
all.
pressing. Buddy also, I watched him work on his arthritic shoulder, you know, most days of the week, and when I was there. And so early on in my training career, I kind of devalued the overhead press, and I had times where I would work up to, like, you know, I don't know, 90-pound dumbbells overhead, that sort of thing. But like, I've never really done much military pressing. I've done some push pressing, but I've strayed away from that or pulled away from that in recent years. So it's just modifying. You know, I've got a few different barbell options that I don't need to safety bar, you know, SS yoke. I mean, that I don't need to put my shoulder into these positions of extension and external rotation, and that generally helps.
Then when it comes back to baseline, you'll put things back.
Yeah, but I could. My training is modified. It's
Got it.
It's already changed.
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing straight bar flat bench press because that requires a ton of shoulder extension.
Yeah.
You know, I feel better with incline press than I do with flat. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, that puts more stress on your shoulder, but it's different. It depends. It's a different stress. And that's where understanding the lifts and all of that, combine that with the therapy and the anatomy knowledge, puts you in a position to advise lifters. But so it's like when I mentor PT students and with my staff and everything, we talk about like a trainable menu for our people. What can we do? What exercises can we load heavier and with more intensity? What exercises are the maybe more apprehensive ones that we have to slowly work into? You know, and so I have my trainable menu of the things that I can push myself on and feel pretty good with.
Now, with your education and your experience, this will be fun actually. With your education and experience, let's take the overhead press, right? And let's say that you're going to debate with yourself, right? So on one side, 100% pro, on the other side, 100% con, right?
Yeah.
First, speak as the person that's 100% against. Now, let me frame this better. You're in the middle, right? You're gonna. I know that. Like you're gonna bounce around based upon the specificity of the individual. I want to state that so this doesn't get clipped into some stupid bullshit, right? We're just having some fun here, right? All right. So now you're the 100% against. Why should they never overhead press?
Yeah. Well, what do we do completely overhead? There's nothing that you do with your bicep next to your ear besides overhead press. Everything's at an angle, and you're going to reposition your body and your torso to get to that position anyways. So even if you look at like an offensive lineman for football, yeah, they might be in this position here, but for listeners, I'm at like a incline press position or a landmine press position. I'm not completely overhead. And if you're in that overhead position, you're screwed anyways because you're about to fall down into the ground. And so there's just not a lot of functional things that we do in life overhead. We don't even change light bulbs completely overhead. We try to reposition our torso and we get spinal extension so that we're at more like 150 degrees of overhead motion rather than 180. Additionally, a lot of people's acromion processes and their anatomy are not necessarily built to handle that type of overhead stress over and over again. And so unless you have like perfect scapular movement to deliver that scapula and posteriorly tilt it and put the glenoid in a position where the humerus is not impinging at all, unless you have all of that and good thoracic extension, you probably shouldn't be overhead pressing very much. Now, some people can obviously get away with it for a long period of time. Obviously, there are powerlifting programs like 531 that are pro overhead press for some people. On the flip of that, some people can get away with it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, why should they?
Yeah.
If you're to counter your own debate,
because you bench press more with your delts than your pecs, anyways. So if you're trying to build your bench press, and your triceps too. So like you're bench pressing more with your delts and your triceps than your pecs, anyways. Your pecs are rotating; they're not doing. They're adducting. They're not you can appreciate that. And so, you know, you're going to start it with your delts and finish it with your triceps. And, you know, so the overhead press is fantastic for that. It also adds movement variability to the mix. Movement variability is kind of this like, oh, it always seems cool. But, you know, I think that for some, if we can load some specific positions heavy and create a stimulus for adaptation, which we can obviously with the overhead press, I think that there's value for it. If you are a physique athlete, there might be some value in overhead pressing to develop your delts in a little bit different way and overload them in a way that you couldn't with a lateral raise. You know, the moment arm's much shorter with an overhead press than a lateral raise. And so you can maybe load the delts a little bit heavier, create a different stimulus for adaptation that way. And finally, we do still have to do a lot of things overhead. So it would make sense in theory if you are an athlete and you're especially a contact type of athlete and you're really trying to stabilize and strengthen your shoulder girdle to the greatest extent, might as well do all of the movements. You know,
What's another thing like that? I'm trying to think of other demonized.
It's knees over toes is like the
Okay, there's a
deep
good
squatting.
one. Yeah, there's a good one.
I mean, knees over toes and deep squatting are different.
Yeah.
And obviously the
Well, let's
knees,
define the difference first.
Yeah, so like when I think of knees over toes, first of all, I'm not thinking of the skinny Instagram influencer that's popularized it. I might be thinking of like Charles Poliquin and the lunge that has been you know, posterized as somebody else's. But when I think of knees over toes, I'm thinking about hamstring to calf and deep knee flexion. And you know, it's one of these things where the level of toxicity of it is in the dosage. So you could do a lot of it and jack yourself up, but you could do the right amount and actually make yourself more resilient, kind of like how a vaccine works. And that's kind of the idea behind, in my opinion, behind knees over toes type of training. You know, I work with people with pathology, so I see I work with a lot of ACL repairs, and most of them these days are getting either a quad or a patellar tendon graft to repair their ACL. Most of the field athletes are. So they need to lengthen that tissue and reload that tissue. So for those people, knees over toes is challenging, but it is an endpoint. It's what we want to work toward. So we need to find ways with, you know, less load and more range of motion to expose them to those positions and gradually increase the load over time. And then the obvious thing is like when you walk down the stairs, you're doing a Peterson step down every step. You know, you get up onto your toe, you lift your heel up off the ground, and you push your knee over your toe every step that you take down the stairs. And you look like an old man if you're not, you know, and same with sprinting and running. When you're in a positive shin angle position, when you're, you know, especially at the start of a sprint, when you're in kind of like a more of accelerative phase, your knees are over your toes. You watch any athlete in a combine jump, and every single person's knees goes over their toes when they're at the bottom of their jump, at that, you know, in their counter movement. And so it is a very functional position to be in. And if it's functional and you know, it makes sense, then why aren't we training it?
Now, how would you define a deep squat?
I mean, top of the quad being higher than the crease of the hip. You know, just hitting what would be a competition depth. I don't know that there's a ton of value in taking something that is a percentage-based lift and trying to squat hamstrings to calves, hamstring to calf. I don't know that is something that's going to yield fantastic results. I personally like to do that up to maybe 50% of my 1RM. Any more than that, and I don't see that there's tremendous benefit, and I understand that there are very high patellofemoral joint compressive forces in those deeper positions. So I, you know, kind of tread lightly there. I have a partial ACL in my left knee and a diagnosed meniscus. I tore my MCL in my left knee. I've got some issues there, and if I do tons of deep work, it actually feels pretty good, but I can also bounce the other way if I do a little bit too much at the same time. As you can probably appreciate, it's like that. You're always straddling that line.
Trying to find some balance, you know, in between there where with my own stupid self-training with the, and then these are things that I run by, physical therapists and doctors and people that I know. And sometimes they're just enablers and sometimes they're more realists, but, with 2 prosthetics, speaking of the squat, I knew post-surgery, here's what you shouldn't do. Don't cross your legs, just the first crap you shouldn't do within the first 8 weeks or whatever it was. All I did with that was extend it across my whole training. It's like, I'm still going to train hard, but I'm not going to ever go lower than 90 degrees with anything heavy, knee to hip. And I'm talking joint, not crease of the knee, not powerlifting, the actual joint.
Right. Which ends up being much higher than parallel.
Yes, most definitely. So to me, it's okay. There's a box, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it with my strongest stance, which is my box, a wider stance. It's going to be a box. It's going to be a higher box. And then I'm always going to sit back because that's how I've always done. Keeps the load on the glutes and the hips. Plus I have the box in case the prosthetic is to pop out for whatever reason. I'm only going to fall this far on the box. The other thing is I fear if I'm using greater loads and I start to go to fatigue and I was going lower, what if my knee did come in? It's a prosthetic. Once it goes out once, it's going to be more inclined to just keep going out lower and later in the future. And then I'll use reverse bands because that lower position is the most vulnerable position at the top. So I, it's my stupidity that people will see actually makes a lot of sense when you walk it all through. Until you get to the higher end doctor and they're like, but you could just still do this with like less weight and still get the same result, which I agree with that. But those,
it's not as fun.
Not at all. But I think those type of things and what you were talking about with the shoulder is if you're not competing, right, then there's no reason to have these lifts in that may be more traumatic's probably the wrong word, more
they're strict.
You
don't have the ability to select. Like, you're very specific probably about the camber of the safety bar that you're using.
Oh, of course.
And you didn't even hesitate for a second. And so like if you're using a straight bar, you don't have any you can't customize anything.
Well, some things just over time and with wear and tear, just every time you do it just feels like you're driving a nail into a board. And what I try to get through these people is you don't have to do those. You're not competing in those anymore. Use something else and then figure out how to periodize that, for those training maxes, and then customize them to, we'll get to where you can come in and help a lot more. Customize them to what your limitations are, as I spoke about there. But also understand there's limitations to my limitations to my restrictions. If that's all I ever do, and then at the end of the training I don't walk over, or at least some period of time during a week, walk over and just grab a power rack and try to sit down into the lowest close stance squat that I can. Then all I'm doing is training a very low range without ever training any end ranges, which can become a problem if I slip on ice, or put myself in some of those other positions where with the shoulder, for instance, I can flip the bar around. I can use a shoulder saver pad, board presses, I can use all those other things. But at some point, and for me, it's going to be like a standing cable press. At some point, I need to get back into a loaded end range without pain, and it's not going to be a lot of weight to be able to work those end ranges. I assume you agree with that.
Absolutely. And so, like, for me, that's the push-up. And I love weighted push-ups. Because my scaps can really retract in a different way that they can on a bench. And it feels a push-up, but I can get into shoulder extension. I can lengthen that anterior tissue in my chest. I don't have to worry as much about, straining a pec because I'm constantly taking it through that motion. And for me, that's like, from the trainable menu standpoint, I've got something that I'm training for actual adaptation, like strength adaptation, and then I've got other things I'm training more from a range of motion adaptation standpoint. And that might be my push-up, my weighted push-up, my push-up on parallettes, my depth push-up. Isos in those deeper positions can sometimes be a really valuable way to get that tissue to still have the tissue integrity in those positions. But and this is the flip of it, but you also mentioned accommodating resistance using a reverse band setup on the squat. That's a great, I forgot to mention that, but that's a great tool for me too.
Yeah.
You know, and just throwing some chains on, if I'm going to do a full range of motion bench press on a normal bench press, like just throwing some chains on there can sometimes be a nice way to increase that weight.
For this application that we're speaking about, how would you program in the ISOs?
I typically like to do ISOs before the lift, kind of in that warm-up phase of training. I like to do anywhere from 5 to 20 seconds. If I want that ISO to be more, if my ISO is more focused on power production and I'm working with an athlete, it's going to be in the mid-range where the muscle is the strongest, and it's going to be for no more than 3 seconds because I want that. I need that phosphocreatine system only. Whereas if my ISO is more of a range of motion or building type of approach, it's going to probably be either at the beginning or the end of the training session. It's going to be in those deeper ranges of motion. So it might be a rear foot elevated split squat with the front foot elevated ISO. It might be a one leg down, pause at the bottom, 2 feet up, like, for the patellar tendon. It might be that deep push up ISO hold, 10-second hold, 10 reps. And to be honest with you, I stole that from Buddy. That was one of the things that he had his guys do before they would bench. They would do 10-second hold, 10 reps on push-up, 10-second hold, 10 reps on barbell inverted row, and also use the barbell inverted row to kind of pattern the bench press in the opposite.
Yeah, so we're talking moderate effort too, so it's not like big effort.
Exactly. Right. And so like the high effort ISOs are typically more mid-range for me in terms of joint and muscle position, and that's more for power production.
Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot the question I was going to follow that up with the if the coach, athlete, therapist, whoever's building the program doesn't put in, say the full program is based upon just the basic movements that we're talking about, but not doing things to be able to strengthen the end ranges like what we're talking about, what are some of the potential long-term implications of not doing that?
So I mentioned it, but muscle strains. If you are not exposing your muscle tissue, as we understand how muscles adapt, they are specific to the range of motion that they're exposed to. And so you're going to tap into more fibers if you are taking yourself through a full range of motion. We mentioned the bench press is not a tremendous pec exercise. Obviously, you're using your pecs, but you're not using them to their full extent. So you need to do something that's more rotational based around the shoulder and includes abduction and adduction out to greater degrees. So I'm doing a cable fly motion with my hands right now because I think the band cable fly, granted bands have accommodating resistance, not as much at the end, but you get what I'm saying. Brain's moving too fast. But I think that any sort of band or cable fly, or even like a light dumbbell fly, could be tremendously helpful. Like I used to struggle with this thing where I would get this kind of like pec minor, pec tightness on my right shoulder, not the one that I've had the surgeries on. And this was when I was doing the straight barbell bench press 2 or 3 times a week and training for powerlifting for years there. And one thing that I found to be, just from an anecdotal to be very helpful for me, was doing light dumbbell flies after I would bench. So I would do like 2 sets of, and this is kind of like the Louis high rep approach to rehab, like, just 2 sets of 15 or 3 sets of 15 with like 15-pound dumbbells and pauses at the end, just kind of like going with what felt right, and and if my shoulder wasn't as pissed off or it was feeling good that day, like I could really put some pressure on it and extend it. And I used to do that all the time to kind of counteract the shorter range of motion arched bench that I was doing when I was never exposing my pecs to those longer muscle length positions.
That's why I threw the question out there, because most of the audience is they don't think of this.
Right. And so like the question was, what type of risks are we putting ourselves at if we train in shorter ranges of motion? And in addition to muscle strains and muscle tears and that sort of thing, we're also just not building ourselves to be as functional of humans. And so when you have to get down on the ground, when you have to, bend to a way that like your knees are going deeper into much deeper positions of flexion, you don't want to lose that over time because you're never squatting there and never going there in your training. So I think that even grabbing like some blast straps. I was going to say TRX, but like, you know, I have some blast straps
Yeah,
that are old school, but like even grabbing anything that you can hold on to assist your body weight and just going into deep knee flexion, I think can be extremely helpful. And that might help to, when people have like proximal quad tendinopathy, they kind of get that achiness in their quad just above their knee. One of the best things for that is just lengthening the quads, you know, taking yourself into a deep squat. That can really help that. And so, you know, tendons obviously adapt to load, and there's been a lot of popularity with tendon rehab and isometrics and a lot of the research and the people in my world that are doing all this, all these Australians and everything on tendon research.
How does that work though? I mean, how can you isolate research for tendon rehab but discount muscle function?
Yeah, and so that's the tricky thing is like tendon rehab says to do isometrics for long periods of time. The muscle function research, so like Danny Lum, Alex and Tara, that's all short isometrics.
Yeah.
Whereas Jill Cook, Peter Malliaris, the research from that standpoint is all long. So you have to figure what are your demands for your specific sport? What's our entry point? What can we start with that's not going to piss it off?
Yeah.
Maybe do a high intensity isometric at mid range is going to piss it off, but maybe doing a low intensity isometric at end range is going to feel better. So we have to kind of like find out, you know, what's that entry point from a trainable menu standpoint? Where do we want to get to? What is the multivariable progression, range of motion, intensity, tempo that we're going to use to get there?
Yes. Let's step back just real quick, because it's, in my mind, when I hear isometric, there's several things go through my head. There's isometric, then there's quasi-isometric, then there's isometric, you know, loading against an object, and then there's yielding.
Yeah, like
you
yielding
know,
versus overcoming.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Where I think most of the things that we've been talking about, 3/4 of the things that we've been talking about are more yielding. You know, which for those lists, I don't want them to go search like isometric and think, oh, split stance, I got to put a bar on my back and then, you know, go into pins.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. It's more of a yield. It's a broad, it's one of those crazy things in strength and conditioning that's like a broad thing that defines a lot of different, you know, downshoots from that. Kind of like intensity, you know, a strength coach sees it as an expression of a 1 rep max. A bodybuilder sees it as working hard. You know, you kind of define those.
And then RPE's floating somewhere in the middle there.
Oh yeah, all over the place, all over the place. Yeah, oh yes, that's the another interesting one where actually let's just roll into that, right? Because you're working with people that are dealing with pain. Yeah. You know, so now they have this pain scale. You know, so how do you quantify that with the patients that you're working with, or anchor it, or, I mean, how does that work?
You know, you used the word anchor at the beginning. We were talking about your pain scale, and I hate having to anchor things and the numbers, and it's so different for everybody. Yeah. And that's where I think, like, being an attentive coach or therapist and understanding the people that you're working with and having that exposure over time puts you in the best position to judge. Yeah. Because, like, especially if I'm working with like a 17-year-old and I ask them like, what was your intent? I don't know. You know, it's like, it's, you know, so you have to figure out like who's the person that's going to respond to that and that you can really ask that or not. I joke around with people sometimes. I ask them, did you feel like you were doing something? Because it's like I'm giving them new exercises. I'm trying to decide what that load's going to be. And, you know, and sometimes they're like, oh, that's really easy. Other times it's not. And so like I kind of start there. I personally don't use a lot of RPE in the true sense of asking my athletes what their RPE is. However, I will say things to them like, how many do you think you had left in the tank? And the first few times I ask them that, they don't know how to answer it. So that's my entry point to anchor it and to figure out, okay, can we do more? And I try to engage them in that thought process so that they become more aware and engaged of the training and rehab that we're doing, and that they can kind of build that internal focus to actually feel what's going on in their body and how much more they might have in the tank or what, you know, because it's you have to anchor it, like you said, and you have to get them engaged with that internal part of them that understands that. And not everybody's great at that. Yeah. And if you're coaching somebody that's not great at that, you got to understand that too. Like some people just they're shitty at feeling their own muscles working, or they're not great at judging, or like you know, and that's where watching their speed is so important. I mean, like tendo units. I know there was something you wrote, like tendo units. When you guys brought tendo units into Westside, they just told you what you already knew. But it's like, I'm watching them and I'm judging, and that's
and there's ways. I mean, what happened there is it just became a dick measuring contest because we could see it. So at that point, we no longer cared what our technique looked like. I just had to beat you.
Yeah.
And then vice versa. So the session just ended up being a complete train wreck where people. I found you can drop it and then it's going to go up. And you take it away. Now, if you flip that,
like a depth jump and getting that.
Yeah, exactly. Now you flip it so we can't see it, only you can see it.
Yeah.
Then it becomes a metric that has certain value. Right. I have seen other coaches where I visited a school one time and they had them attached to all their different power racks, and I'm always interested on how they use them. Right? I'm not against them in any way. It's a metric. Use every metric you can. And he used it to know when to end the set, so if it starts to slow down, then that's when they should end the set. And I said, but you do understand that these are football players and weight training is not like important to them. And as soon as they realize I can just stand up a little slower, my set's over, especially when they see it's going to be like 10 to 15, they can just slow down at 5. And then, the look on the coach's face was like, fuck.
Well, are you really? I mean, this is a whole training theory thing, but like, are you really training speed at that point, anyways?
No.
No.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Right. I mean, I'd rather use it more of a dynamic way.
Yeah.
Dynamic effort, but that's my own bias.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's that's my bias too of like the whole approach, and that's part of like the conjugate method, for example, and being able to load people in different ways. I think is so extremely helpful, and that's one of my biggest biases in terms of helping people work through injuries is like, hey, let's do something a little bit different. Let's choose a different primary exercise.
If it's an online client, because what we were just talking about a little bit ago is just nonverbal communication essentially. Is what do you think you're left in the tank, and then over a year, it becomes easier because you can say, okay, when you go do this set, leave about 3 in the tank, and they're going to get what you're talking about. Yeah. How do you do that with an online client?
To be honest, I don't really do any online coaching.
Okay, so that answers that question very easy. So that most of that would just be consulting type of stuff that you would do online.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have a online training platform.
Yeah.
But it's not a one-to-one type of setup.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
All right. What so you got the knees over toes. Then we had the the shoulder,
deep shoulder
the shoulder
position. Yeah.
Back.
Low back's the other big one, probably.
Yeah.
Because people don't tend to have as many hip problems. Obviously, they do, but it's not. I mean, I would say that low back, in terms of the idea of like rounding of the low back, is probably the big one. And I think that a lot of people are scared to round their low back, or they've not trained in those positions. And I would say that like half of the people that come in to see me and are having issues with their back, I teach them how to deadlift in from more of a flex position, and it helps them quite a bit.
What do you mean?
A lot of times we get this idea and we read a few articles about pulling the slack out of the bar and getting our lats engaged and tight, and we forget that our thoracic spine is in a flex position from a default standpoint. And so what I try to get people to do is engage their lats, but then reach forward so that they're not making themselves pull from a super extended position, because the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to lose that extended position anyways if they're doing any sort of weight or any sort of intensity that's going to actually help them to get stronger. And so I use video analysis quite a bit with these people when I'm coaching them through technique. And I'll give them like the dead bug and the cat camel and the basic whatever I think they need. Maybe they're hammering core stability and their anterior trunk's strong as shit, but they can't even reverse their lumbar curve. Then maybe we're focused more on mobility of their low spine. Whatever it might be, I'm going to give them the corrective PT stuff, but I'm also going to take them through technique. And so, I remember reading, I think I got it from Brett Contreras maybe originally, just about the actual the mechanics of when you flex your lumbar spine and you reduce the moment arm from your low back extensors. It actually makes you it puts you in a much stronger position from a pulling standpoint. And you think about whether you're pulling conventional or sumo, you're going to be in a rounded position once you get that bar off the ground before you finish it. The majority of people, and the strongest deadlifters are always in that rounded position before they finish the lift. And, I think that people, they get this idea that arching their back is a safe or protective position, when in reality, arching our back is what causes spondylolisthesis. It's what causes, impingement of nerves oftentimes. It's arching our back has been thought of through, like, you're familiar with McKenzie at all, the McKenzie method for back, and the idea is that it's like you're putting the nerve back into place by extending your back for an insane amount of repetitions. It's kind of the opposite of the way McGill approaches it from a stability standpoint, and I'm much more in line with what McGill would talk about. Now, McGill would also talk about, like, too much flexion can be dangerous as well, and that's I could probably have a debate about some of the research that he kind of originally used, but regardless, either way, what we understand is that putting our back in kind of a neutral-ish position, because there's not one perfect neutral, lifting from that position and training, understanding that if we're going to go into flexion, we got to train there, and getting strong in that position and getting out of that position. So training things where you go into flexion and then out can be extremely helpful. And that's where you got your 45-degree back raises, you can use your GHD for a back raise straight out, parallel to the ground. You've got your RDLs and your other, just these other accessory movements that can train your spinal extensors from a position of flexion when they're lengthened.
All right, so I'm going to just jump to a completely different topic, and let's go to the feet, right? So you've been around long enough to see that these different things just keep coming around in phases, right? It's like, I jokingly see it, just from a training standpoint, I'm just waiting for the high intensity training to come back, because the high volume was really, really popular. It's kind of dying out. It's like we're waiting for the next thing, which usually is some version of high intensity training,
like the old school machines and
one set to failure. So it was Edgar Garden, then Ken Leisner, then Dorian Yates, and it just goes through. So, and then with therapy or whatever you want to call it, it's like, oh, here we go. Here's the core, it's back, and here's the Copenhagen. That didn't last long. That was about a year, maybe that. Now it's the one arm cable row, and that's been on a stretch for about a year. It's about ready to be replaced with something else. And it always kind of, there's the whole cyclical thing where the and the foot's one of those that kind of comes in. I'm not saying that none of these are not important. I'm just saying they come in these weird waves, which end up being the end all be all to fix actually everything, is that one thing. And with the foot and the routine and all that, just from a basic level, what are your thoughts? And then we can kind of go a little bit deeper from there.
Yeah, so I really approach it from my answer is going to be more political than exciting, but I really approach it from an individual standpoint. If people have people's feet are more different from one person to the next than almost anything else, I think, from an anatomical standpoint. You got people with super flat feet, and they just live in a really pronated position, and their tibia is internally rotated, and when they jump and land, you just see their knees collapsing. You have other people that have extremely stiff supinated feet with high arches. These people need different approaches for their feet, and I think that the movement toward, like, everybody being barefoot and everybody trying to build their arches naturally is jacking some people up. I think that people that have really stiff feet probably shouldn't be doing too much stuff from a high impact standpoint barefoot, because they don't have the same natural shock absorption and pronation of their foot as some other folks do. And on the flip, I think that people that have really flat feet shouldn't be reading this kind of like borderline fear-mongering stuff about how they need to build their arch themselves, and how, we have a lot of tools at our disposal. You've got these orthopedic cushions on the chairs that we're sitting on. It's like, why not wear a shoe that helps you to feel better? And a lot of the research from a simplified standpoint on footwear says that, like, people kind of have a natural instinct for what feels good on their feet, and they should follow that. Like, I remember when I was a kid, you would go to the store and you would kind of like try on shoes and bounce around in them and look kind of goofy. And sometimes like outside of like a shoe store, there would be like a little, like the person that works there would be like, why don't you jog down to the end of the parking lot and back? And you do stuff like that. And now I feel like shoes are more of the, you know, the online shoe world has grown tremendously. I know it's just my Instagram algorithms, but I see shoes all the time on there. I've got no bulls on my feet right now, which I first discovered online many years ago. I do think that a wide toe box is helpful and important. I think that the narrow toe box puts your MTP joint of your big toe in a valgus position and is not ideal for foot mechanics. But that being said, you know, I have a chronic turf toe, and super minimalist shoes don't work that well for me. My turf toe sometimes tends to get flared up with that. And you know how I got that turf toe? Wearing Vibrams doing heavy sled pushes a decade ago.
Yeah.
I hopped into them too fast, and I never went and got it looked at for years, and I found out I had a plantar plate tear, and there really wasn't a lot to do about it.
No, I appreciate your answer, because it's I'm going back when I was at Westside, and the band tension was through the roof. I mean, just the ridiculous side of when things were just ridiculous for the band tension. I developed plantar fasciitis, you know, and I swear it was from that. I don't know what else it would have been from, right? And it's terrible. I mean, it was awful, right? So you can't walk, and I'm using towels to like slide, you know, just when I get out of bed, just to be able to get to the bathroom. And, you know, it's this vicious thing. And, you know, so then, you know, the solution then was to wear arch supports outside of the training shoes, and it kind of helped. Actually, the big solution was cortisone, which kind of did help for a short period of time. But it took me years to kind of figure out that there's a balance there. Like the fascia is destroyed, and I actually ended up tearing one of them, which was awesome. I was in a swimming lazy river, and I went to try to jump into the inner tube, and I tore something in the bottom of my foot. It hurt like a bitch. And went to the foot doctor the next day, and he's like, actually what you did is what we do when we do surgery for plantar fasciitis. You just, and I'm like, cool, I'll never have a problem with that one. And
it felt better after that?
100%. I mean, it hurt for that day, but then after that, it's like, wow, this is way better.
It's like a manipulation under anesthesia.
It's kind of, it's kind of what it was. But he was the one that explained to me that, you know, when it's flared up and it hurts, you know, the support is kind of just like a brace. It's just a cast. It's helping while it's in there. But you can't live in those, because if you live in those, your foot's never going to sprawl, and you're not going to absorb the force, and it's going to make the knees and the hips and everything else worse. And then that's when it became, okay, if I'm at home, it's just barefoot. If my foot does start to hurt, then I put the shoes on that have the soles. If not, then they're going to be flats. And there's like 3 pairs of shoes just laying around pretty much everywhere I go for that reason. There's the flats, there's this, and there's that. And you learn over a period of time that, and to your point, I think that the people that have the issues that you're talking about, the plantar fasciitis and all that, they're being forced to try to always strengthen it. And then, I don't know if this is even possible, but that foot goes into overtraining mode, never gets out, and never gets better. And the only time they can rest is when they sleep, and that's not really doing a whole lot, because the circulation to the feet isn't really great when you're sleeping.
You know, it's very similar to the other comparisons that we were discussing with full range of motion for a bench press or your shoulder and your pecs, or full range of motion for your knee. If you're in a flat shoe, you're going to be taking your foot through that full range of motion. You're going to be stretching the plantar fascia. But there are times where having a heel drop can actually feel a lot better and help that tissue to heal. Or if you're doing squats and if you're squatting in lifting shoes, I don't think that's a bad thing, and that shouldn't be demonized. I see some people that putting them in a pair of squat shoes when they've been reading all this stuff about how squat shoes are bad for you is actually the fix for them.
Yes.
And it's like, screw it. If I'm doing 6 sets with shoes on twice a week, that doesn't have a negative impact for the rest of my life. You know, that's actually positive. So we should use some of these orthotics and these changes. And
I've seen people go through weird phases too. So they'll start in flats, and their squats look okay. I mean, it's decent. Then they'll go on a heel. Squats look way better. and then they start to get a little bit stronger, a little bit heavier, starts to look like shit. They go back in flats, it goes back up again. So they shouldn't get stuck in one either.
Yeah.
Because leverage changes with body weight, and leverage probably doesn't change with load, but your mechanics will change some, with load.
Yeah. Leverage can change a little bit just in the fact that if you're squatting, let's say you're using a safety bar with camber or whatever it is, if you're using a bigger load, that's going to offset your body weight leverage even more.
Yeah.
So it does change a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely if you're getting stronger and bigger over time, it changes quite a bit too.
So with you being in this industry, and we're just going to say physical therapy industry now, there's been a lot of changes in the last 20 years, right? The one I kind of like to joke about is what seminars have become certifications, right?
Yeah.
Certifications, old certifications have become, I don't even know what they are now.
Yeah.
You know, it's what are some of the positives that you've seen that have changed from because it is better, right? Because me trying to find a physical therapist 20 years ago was an absolute nightmare. I mean, luckily I just knew Buddy Morris, who was the strength coach of the Cleveland Browns. And so somebody who's working with high-end athletes that understand where you're coming from. So yes, there's a lot better. On the local level, I don't know if it's really that much better or not, but what are some of the things that you've seen that have changed for the positive since you've been in?
Yeah, so if you look at the field of physical therapy, there's a ton of programs being developed, and there's a higher bar that they've set to get into these programs. So we have our doctorates now, and so it's attracting a higher level of person, I would say. And it's just a profession that probably has, more positive feelings around it than it used to. And so I think that more people that are motivated and, maybe would have pursued like a medical degree or something like that are going into PT. So I think that the talent is better than what it used to be. And there's a ton more physical therapists than there were 20 years ago. So there's just you're going to have, with a larger pool, you're going to have more people that are at the top and that are more motivated and talented and willing to put in the work for it. Additionally, I think that with the growth of CrossFit, unfortunately, we sit in here, and CrossFit's not how I got my hands on a barbell, but I think most people in the U.S. or maybe in the world that are using barbells today probably got exposed to it from CrossFit or an offshoot from CrossFit. And I mean, the fitness industry is so different than it was a decade ago. And so I think that more people, like you used to walk into like a Gold's gym in a city somewhere, and there would be like one squat rack, and I would be taking it up for 30 minutes in 2006 or whatever, But now there's like these gyms are opening up or putting rigs in them and stuff like that. Like I think of a Washington Sports Club is in my area in DC, and they switched from one squat rack to like 6 the one near me. And so like I think that with all of these things becoming more popular, they've fed into physical therapy, and there are more physical therapists that are qualified to actually help people who have athletic goals. And it's not as much of a hospital and rehabilitative, meaning like knee replacements and strokes and spinal cord injuries and MS and CP and kids with issues. There's still a lot of that in physical therapy, of course, and there always should be. I mean, it's a big part of our world, and more than half of physical therapists are working in those settings. However, there is more of a focus on the sports side of things than there used to be. It used to be in sports 20 years ago, if you tore your ACL, it was probably a death sentence. Now, some of the highest paid players and performers on Sunday in the NFL have ACLs, or have had ACL repairs. And so the development of improvement in orthopedic surgeries and all of that has made the rehabilitative standards and goals higher as well. So I just think that like the physical therapy profession has shifted more towards sports and performance than it used to be. That being said, as we discussed earlier, if it's not an interest of yours outside of your 9 to 5, you're not going to be in a position to really help athletes and that sort of thing. It's still not really covered in sports. It's still a total niche performance, that is. in my physical therapy education, I was not ever taught about sprinting mechanics. I was only taught walking and gait mechanics. I learned sprinting mechanics from Charlie Francis and Derek Hansen and, a lot of like people from the performance world, not from the rehabilitative world. Now I can take that knowledge and synthesize and combine it with rehabilitation and talk about the sprinting's influence on your hamstrings or your hip flexors or whatever soft tissue injury you have, and put that together. But that wasn't taught to me.
Yeah.
I had to take those two different pieces and combine them. And so I still think that there's a tremendous a knowledge deficit for performance amongst most medical professionals.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree 1,000%.
I'd love to see physical therapy. So, physical therapists have residencies, and they can go for an extra year. And all it gives you is like a 3-letter thing behind your name, like board certified orthopedic sports specialist, I would love to see that be required for physical therapy, so that it would make school even longer, which sucks. But that way, you actually, instead of just any old Joe that does CrossFit and wants to open up a PT practice in a CrossFit gym but doesn't know anything about actual lifting, they've had that experience. They've worked in a performance setting for a year ahead of time.
Yeah.
So, and with all these changes, there's always going to be imposters or people who want to be in that world or think they belong in that world, but they don't really.
And I got a handful of DPTs, right? So that when I look at any of the injuries and stuff that I've ever dealt with, they're like the top of the hierarchy. Actually, no, my medical doctor is the top of the hierarchy, and then it's DPT. Yeah. And then from there's not only do I look for those people that know strength and conditioning and know the physical therapy, but also know all the different modalities that are swimming around, which may not really be applied to any of that, ART, MAT, because this is what the athletes are being inundated with. Like, oh, look, you don't need this, you need this, right? And I don't want to call any certain thing out by name, but there's hundreds of different things that you can say, this, and this. Yeah. And none of them are really under a physical therapy umbrella. Some of them might be tools that you may use, but that broadens the knowledge scope of those people on what they need to know, just even if it's a superficial level, to say, oh, this, and it's kind of like this, like applied kinesiology, upshoot, or whatever it is. And which is another area that I think when you start to get up to that level, that how do you keep up with all that? It probably shouldn't be that hard, because a lot of it's just the same thing reinvented in a different way. Yeah. But it does kind of play into that, because it makes that person look less qualified to the pro athlete or the top end athlete when they come in and say, hey, look, what do you think about contrast? I'm going to go simple, like a contrast, path type thing. And that's all bullshit. Yeah. No, wait a minute. I need there's a better answer than it's just all, tell me why it's all bullshit, and kind of play into that, which you would think they would be exposed to that with that strength and conditioning side too. Yeah. Because a lot of that comes in there. Because I do think from my own experience, a lot of those other low-hanging modalities, or whatever we want to call them, weren't necessary. Had I had better advice, advising to me as to why they're not necessary, right? From the very onset, to where just other simple things like just walking more would have been just as beneficial from that. Yeah. Which kind of leads into the whole, certification thing, to where I'll say it, you may not, that a lot of times if you see this new certification and you to me, it's a red flag. It really is. It really is, because even good certifications have become so watered down with what they used to be able to pass, that I personally just tell everybody a certification, unless it's a licensed board, you're like, that's not saying even a certification though. I mean, it's a license, right? It's just a seminar. and just look at it as such. And because nobody's going to give a fuck if it's on your resume or not.
Yeah.
You know, and at this point, most people are going to have 30 of them on their resume anyhow.
Yeah.
You know, so just to look at those is, I mean, would you, it's just seminars? Because that's what I saw them when I was coming up.
I'm not going to mention the person, but an online friend of mine is going around the country with a certification, and he told me that his ticket sales and everything just went through the roof when he added a certification to what he was doing. You know, and it's like, but who gives a shit about the certification?
I know
it's
that.
it's still the same fucking thing. It's still you're still going for a weekend. So, you know, yeah, you can throw these 3 letters behind your name, but those 3 letters don't carry the same weight as DPT or even as like CSCS or, you know.
It's a weird one, man, because it doesn't just increase the ticket sales. You can also increase the price by a grand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't understand it. I don't know what's driving it. Is it young people trying to build their brand? You know, going back to the kind of the beginning of our conversation. I don't know. But the thing that pisses me off about them is that they see this profit market in order to sell their certification and whatever. So they make different levels to it. They go into these deep rabbit holes, and they don't provide the people that are taking them with the nuance that you need. If your athlete comes and says, hey, look, what do you think about this? I give them nuance. I'm like, look, you know, sure, going to your in-range and like FRC, for example, like going to your in-range and contracting your muscle can be good. Lift-offs are helpful if you're trying to regain your range of motion, but you might be a hypermobile baseball player that you don't need that, you know, or like whatever. Like, it's just, they don't provide the nuance and the application and indications for their interventions. They just say everybody needs to do this no matter what, and they go down these deep rabbit holes. I mean, you know, there's a lot of them out there, and they don't create critical thinkers.
I don't know. I mean,
and they're not all bad. And
I know, I get that.
And I've taken tons of these courses because I think that it helps me as a practitioner.
I wonder how many of the people that are actually signing up for them are signing up for them for the knowledge, or signing up for them just to become more familiar. In other words, they want to build their resume so then they can be the person to give their cert.
Yeah.
You know, so they're only going to all these other certifications, just kind of build. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't believe not for all, but for a lot of them, I don't believe the end goal is actually helping people on the other end. I think the end goal is for them to actually be the person to create the online course that they can sell, to be the person that. And the only reason I say that, right, is because if you really, really look at half of them that are out there now, they're being offered by people that A, don't have a practice, and B, don't have clients or patients, right?
That's their full-time job.
That's their full-time job, but in many cases, they never had patients, a practice, or clients.
Yeah, maybe they did it for 2 years at the beginning.
If that, right? So granted, you know, that doesn't change the value of the education if the education is good. I just wonder how many people that are going through these things, what their motives for going through those things are. You know, and it's up to them. I mean, they're the ones paying for it, and whatever value they want out is what they're to get out of it. But it does become a little convoluted when they come out of those things, and then they're the ones giving advice or education to other people. Where, you know, my grandstanding of the whole thing is, I don't care who you are, if you take training seriously. You know, as I've said with, you know, hormone optimization and preventive medicine, you should have somebody at the top of that food chain for blood work and stuff like that. Absolutely. You should have somebody at the top of the food chain, even if it's a consultant in some way, that's a DPT or really knows their way around the realm. Even if it's just a once a year check-in, like here's what's going on, just to help navigate. Yeah. Because it is awesome that, and I'm not one of the old guys that's just gonna bitch because there's so much information out there. How cool would that have been had that been out there when we were coming up? I mean, you had to like to crawl and like go to libraries and find books, and you know, now it's like I can find almost anything on my phone within 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of awesomeness to that.
There's so much good information out there. There's also, like we said earlier, there's also just a lot of bad information out there, and I think that's more challenging because when I was reading like Q&A forums on Elite FTS, or I just don't think there was as much bad information out there. It was a lot harder to find the good information.
Mm-hmm.
You had to know where to look, but like once you were there, you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's like whatever's trending on social media, which is different every day, could very potentially be bad or maladaptive belief-based information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are some courses that are kind of almost built on that, and a lot of it kind of comes down to like human psychology and like building on fear a little bit in the training and rehab world, because I think that is, our concern, our fear of injury and the promise that you will never get injured. First of all, obviously we know those are bullshit promises, but, I think that those are the psychological tenets that people market. A lot of people are marketing this stuff through.
Yeah. I mean, I've always kind of liked the pain-free whatever follows.
Yeah.
It's like, it's okay.
Right.
Like, squatting is not exactly pain-free.
Yeah.
You
And
put
it's
300 pounds on your back.
Yeah. It's like what I said earlier. You've reached your point of diminishing returns for health a long time ago, buddy. And now it's just about whatever you want to perform doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's, I think that there's definitely there's always room for more people who are championing critical thinking and how to discern good from bad in this rehab and training world.
When you think back through your career thus far, what have been some of the defining moments or some of the memories that come back? Like this was awesome. This was really cool.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll go back to Buddy, and it's for one specifically. Like he was telling me about when Curtis Martin was at Pitt, and how his job was to not fuck him up, and he did not. And Buddy took no pride in saying I made these athletes or I built these athletes, and he also was very realistic about like, all I need to do is show them a minimum effective dose. We mentioned that football players aren't there to be weightlifters. They're there to be football players. And I think that his understanding of his role in the system, and the fact that he was not making or breaking this person, but that he was just like, his job was to kind of facilitate, I think was so helpful for me, because at that point, if I had been with a strength coach at 22, that had taken full credit for everything, or had told me that everything they did was why an athlete moved X or Y, I think I would have had a different fundamental basis of understanding of what our job is actually to do. Because I work with a lot of barbell athletes, but like my primary, my bread and butter is field athletes. And, in addition to that, he also would kind of go into like LaShawn McCoy was there, and he didn't have the most flexible hips. He wasn't the most perfect functional mover, but he's one of the best change of direction running backs to play the game. He was compared to Barry Sanders in his prime. He was compared to Barry Sanders game after game for a few years there. And it was like, he didn't need, and just seeing the light and understanding that our job as rehab and training practitioners is not to create these perfect movers, and not to totally change the way somebody works, the way their anatomy and their physiology fundamentally works, but rather complement them on their way, I think was just such a huge revelation for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that also applies to cardiophysiology and trying to keep people out of a lactic state, and understanding that people respond differently, and trying to keep people more aerobic during tempo runs, whatever, increasing their rest time during power training if they need it, and just the individualization of it all, and understanding that we are not doing God's work. We're just one piece of the pie. I think those moments for me, and the different practitioners that have had these influences on me, I think have been the biggest, like the most memorable and career shaping things, and hopefully what I'm able to like teach people and kind of
Yeah, with the cardio side that you were speaking about, give me some applications and examples of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so if you have an athlete that's very fast twitch,
how would they know that?
Through testing. Through testing, you put them on a heart rate monitor. You see when when their heart rate gets above an aerobic state. You know, there's a lot of talk right now about like the zone 2 cardio and how helpful that is for longevity. But if you get to a point where your heart rate starts to spike, so for most people, it's probably somewhere above 130, 140, and then higher, and that drops as you age because your maximal heart rate drops. But once you get to that point, you're not using your aerobic system anymore, and you're not going to be able to maintain that for a long period of time. So, like the kind of the Louis-ism of like lactic training and just doing set after set with minimal rest, that's the same thing as like mental conditioning or just having your athletes run up and down stairs all day. But for the high-level, high-fast twitch athlete, that might actually be detrimental to their overall adaptation to put them through that time after time. For that person, they might actually need less of that stimulus and maybe a little bit more of the super low-effort work. But for some athletes, that's going to fuck with their head because they want to push harder than they need to. And so, you know, the cardiophysiology aspect of that for me, yeah, I had learned all about it from a didactic, from a textbook standpoint, but seeing it in practice and seeing athletes on heart rate monitors and seeing the difference in response from one person to the next was tremendously illuminating for me. And that's something that I think about to this day with how I prescribe tempo and speed work for my athletes when they're coming back from injuries. You know, and so it's and I hammer that home with them. Like, it's kind of that ism that we, and this is like the Charlie Francis thing, but like, you don't want to be, there's not a lot of adaptation to be made from that 70 to 90 to 95% range. It's like either you're pushing or you're pulling off a little bit. And maybe you'll pull off at work on speed, but you're not like beating yourself up about it. You know, that's from a barbell standpoint. But if from a running standpoint, either you're pushing or you're pulling back. Like, a lot of recreational runners have no concept of a slow and a fast run. Like for endurance athletes, they have no appreciation of what a slow run actually is. One of the physical therapists that I recently hired was a Division I track athlete, and she's like, oh yeah, my slow runs are like, and she does half marathon training now, and she was like, my slow runs are like 30% slower than my fast runs. And I get endurance athletes all the time that are like, oh yeah, my slow runs are, it's like a 10% difference. You know, and so like the cardiophysiology of pulling back and how much benefit you can still get from your aerobic system and keeping things a little bit easier, that's a mind fuck for some people because they want to push themselves all the time. However, they're actually going to improve their aerobic endurance, or even if you're a lifter, your recovery in between sets, you know, your heart rate recovery, your ability to come back for that next set that's a minute later if you're doing a dynamic effort type of method, and to hit that without and be more recovered is going to depend on your aerobic system. And if you go and get on a step mill for 20 minutes and you're at 160 BPMs the entire time, you're not going to improve that aerobic system nearly as much as you would if you're actually lower for longer.
Yes.
You know.
So that's where I was going to go next, is I assume most of the people who are listening to this are doing 10-minute walks. I mean, they're not doing a whole lot, right? And now they're starting to think, oh, maybe I should start doing more cardiovascular work when I do my training. Where should they start? I know how they think. They're going to start with sled drags, which are going to throw them in and out of the zone that they're supposed to be in because it's going to be too heavy. Where would you suggest that they would start?
I think sled drags are a great option.
As long as it's a lower load.
Yeah. But like, I mean, you can, and it's also a moving target because as you get in better shape, your adaptation's changing too.
Yeah.
But you know, walking is a great place to start. Sled drags are fantastic. You know, I think that the thing with cardio, Dave, is like, cardio's freaking boring. So, and I hate giving people this answer because it's like, they're coming to me for an answer, not an option. But I'm like, what works for you? What are you going to be able to tolerate? You might enjoy going for a walk without your phone and looking at the trees.
Let me keep your thought, but I'm going to push back real quick because there's a lot of exercises that we all do that are really boring too, but we still do them. like side raises and just the accessory exercises.
Yeah.
Nobody's super jazzed about doing all those, but yet they'll still do those and not say that they're boring,
Right.
even though they know they are. But they will say,
I'm speaking as a
no, I get what you're
teacher.
saying. I get it.
Come on, man. I work with athletes. I have no patience for people telling me shit's boring. I'm like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah,
and do
no.
it.
That's what I'm
like,
trying to say right now.
I'm like, I'm here to make you better. Just shut up and do it.
Yeah.
And most of the people I work with are willing to. I find behavioral change to be so important in terms of the landscape of our country and our world and helping people to improve. And I love live, learn, pass on.
Yeah.
All of that. But in practice, between me and you and the listeners, I hate it.
Yeah, that's why I pointed it out, because I don't want people saying, well, this is boring, but meanwhile they know the other shit they're doing is boring too.
I just recently got a Concept 2 bike, and I got the bike erg desk, and I do my Zone 2 cardio while I'm doing emails on my computer. It's I'm like, figure out a way to fucking do it. But I find doing cardio without any productivity whatsoever to be a privilege, because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
I had a long period of time. We actually don't even have an elliptical in our gym anymore, but we used to have an elliptical, and people would give me a hard time. They say, Teddy, you're the only one that uses the elliptical, because I would do my Zone 2 on there, and I would do all my Instagram work on there. I'm in my DMs for 45 minutes, 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And it's like, now I'm not do that. I'm not on social media.
Exactly.
But because it's like, I got a kid, I got other things that take the extra time of my life and priorities. But I would say that so to get back to the root of your question, what's my entry point? I think walking is a fantastic entry point. I think investing in a piece of cardiovascular equipment for your house that you can enjoy and tolerate and works for you orthopedically. If you've got hip or knee issues and the bike doesn't feel great, get an elliptical. Maybe if you get a walking treadmill, like if you, I think that having something like that at your house. And if you need to put a TV in front of you, and that's the time that you rewatch The Sopranos or whatever helps you to just kind of get into that state, do it, and it's like, you just have to be interested in something. You have to be curious about, this is a whole life conversation, but it's like, if you have things that you're curious about in life, you should be able to distract yourself while you're doing cardio.
Yeah. Well, especially if training is a top priority and you understand that recovery is important.
Yeah.
And this helps with the recovery.
Listen to a podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
Like, you should be doing something now.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There's so much content out there now, and it's like, you use that to your advantage to make something a little bit more tolerable.
Yeah. So with that in mind, when you're looking at, somebody's programming, right? There's so many factors. What are some other big misses that you see people messing up? Because to me, that's one example of something that's a big miss.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to get 5, 7, 10,000 steps per day at the easiest level. It's not hard. What are some of the other ones that you see?
Yeah. And we're talking about kind of the home gym lifter,
just global
the
type recovery
type,
lifestyle.
Yeah. I think people overemphasize the kind of the cliche recovery of like generic mobility soft tissue work. I think that some people, they come and see me and they're like, well, I'm spending 45 minutes a day on this stuff already. And it's like, instead what you should do is find what are those specific things that you need to work on for your body, and just do those. I think that, and then replace that other time with some cardio or something else. I think that we get too caught up in thinking that we need to do more from that standpoint than we actually do. And it can take energy away from maybe some more creativity or something from a training standpoint that can help. Cycling through different primary exercises, exposing yourselves to different, maybe that shoulder issue can be taken care of by just not running the same exact bench press for 6 blocks in a row. Maybe just doing something a little bit different, like getting on a floor for 4 weeks in a row for your bench press, or just changing up that way. I felt like in part of my personal growth process, I had to have a few years where I did a ton of corrective exercises and I learned that stuff, and I thought I was fixing everything and recruiting my adductors, and it's like now I spend actually much less time doing that than I used to. You know, there were no greatest stretch alives or inchworms before I deadlifted today. It's like I just warmed up. But that being said, I could tell you what the main things with my body are that I would work on, and I have in my programming if I felt like I needed to do more corrective stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, you know, you mentioned having somebody at the top of kind of that hierarchy of professionals that maybe are helping you. That's where I think, you know, from a self-promotion standpoint, finding somebody like myself who can kind of talk to you about your issues, and even if you're not throwing in the towel or admitting that you're injured. It's more just like, hey, look, everybody's got issues with their body. Just get to know somebody that can help you with those, and hopefully they can help to prevent these issues from being worse. Like if you came to me and you said I strain my pec every 3 months, I'd be like, okay, well let's try some full range of motion pec training maybe, and see how that works. And maybe that's a lot more important than spending 15 minutes rolling out your T-spine every day because you think it's all coming from your T-spine.
And I think with that as well, it also forces, and this is where I have a big problem with it. I think everybody should be working their own training on a long-term plan. And it's just, absolutely. I'm very biased towards that. And I get people that don't, but I'm very biased towards that. I think it forces you into that, right? Because now if I have, you know, here's what my objective is for the entire year, and then we're having a conversation. Then it's like, oh shit, man. Right now we're just going to mitigate it because we're going to really address it here. But for now, we're just going to get through the fire without it burning worse, under the agreement that when we get here, you know, I'm going to remind you,
right,
and then we're going to make that step back. And I think that's vitally important because people will, from what I've seen, will always jump towards their bias instead of what they really need. Right. It's like, okay, that went well, so now I'm going to do this. It's like, ooh, there's the, you know, super compensation. And then the other thing that you kind of touched on a little bit is, you know, a lot of people are doing a lot of recovery and then more recovery and then more recovery, but never doing the stimulus they actually need to have to recover from. So it's like their whole programming has just become a recovery modality with no real stimulus to require the recovery, like 45 minutes on what, you know, I question that's like a red flag. It's like, you know, I do this 45 minutes every day and it's for one thing. It's like, no, first off, no, you don't. You don't. Like, tell me for sure what you're actually doing, right? That's a long time. Like, if you're doing anything, you're anyhow, that's like a rant, you know, of mine that kind of falls into that whole sphere.
I mean, you stole my answer though, because, or you stole the answer I would have wanted to give, because it's a long-term programming, man. And it's like, I'm, you know, not to like plug my non-one-to-one training, but the training platform that I have online, when we're overreaching for deadlifting, we're doing a little bit more low back health work as part of the warm-ups or the block before or block after. I mean, if we're overreaching on deadlifting, obviously we've been building up over a few blocks, but it's like, we run through different primary exercises, and it's the same way that I program my own training. And it's like, if the expression you steal from Peter, give to Paul, it's like you can only do so many things at once. And so you have to plan the other parts of your training to account for that.
More importantly.
And maybe it's like backing off your lat work and your rowing during the time you're overreaching for deadlifting, or doing low back sparing exercises like a chest supported row instead of a pen lay row, or you know, whatever it is. It's like understanding a bigger picture of training so that you're not doing too much of any one thing.
I mean, we live in a 12-week program world. You know, but nobody understands that you have to be prepared for that 12-week program. And then after that 12-week program, what's the phase after that 12 week? They just finish a 12-week program, and then it's like, well, what program am I going to do now? Then they just do the next 12-week program, and then it works really, really well for a beginner because everything does. You know, then they get to the intermediate level, like, I don't know what's going on, and they, you know, learning just basic programming kind of helps, you know, with that. Having those people above that kind of helps with that. It's frustrating in a way because it's not frustrating when you're around groups of your peers so they all get it, they all understand it. Then it's more a matter of, dude, you know this. Like, I know, but I'm just fucking doing it anyhow. It's kind of one of those things where, when you're around, others that are outside the industry, they don't know, and that's the frustrating part, because there is an overabundance of education, right? But then it gets so watered down, and not watered down, that's the wrong word. It gets so monetized on the fringes to the beginners that they don't ever feel like they have control over what they're supposed to do to even make a good decision.
Yeah.
Even a food choice, they don't know. You would think they would know, but they don't know. Because they think that it's in therapy, all of it, just on those far ends.
Right.
That's why I don't work on the far ends.
And that's, you can appreciate this from online business, and you and I both have experience in it. It's like, who are the people that are making those purchases for the online stuff? It's a lot of beginners. It's a lot of people that are early on. And so that's what you market toward, and that's what you create your content about. And it's like, there needs to be somewhere, there needs to be avenues where the more advanced person can still get benefit from something too, and so.
Now with your trajectory with your business, at some point you went from just to like hiring other people. There's a whole rabbit hole here. So, how did you know when it was time? Because for all of us, the answer was too late, right? And I've never found anybody that said I did it too soon. So when did you know it was time? But when do you think you should have with your first employee?
So talking about my brick and mortar Healthy Baller Physical Therapy, I just got to a point where like I was working insane hours, and the demand was really high, and going from one practitioner to two was really tough, because you're cutting your caseload in half, so to speak. Plus, at that point, I've got this Instagram pumping. People are coming to see me. They're not coming to see the person that I hired. Luckily, he's done phenomenally, and now more people come to see him than me, which is great. And it's exactly how I want it to be. But it was really kind of a demand and needs-based thing. And I just got to a point where I couldn't handle the caseload and the amount of people that wanted to come in and see me. And I also knew I did it honestly a little bit earlier-ish. I know that I don't want to ruin your idea that nobody says that, but it was like it was a really slow build. It was tough, because I literally had people that didn't want to work with him, and which is like, years later that would never happen. But it was just like I had to offload some of my caseload. I knew I was in a performance facility as the only token physical therapist rehab guy. I knew that was not what my career goal was. I was like, I'm going to want to take time off and not leave my athletes high and dry for a week when I go, whatever. And so like, for me, that was like I would say the biggest thing was from a quality of life and meeting the needs of our clients and our patients, from growing from 1 to 2. And then from there, it's been smoother each time.
At what point in time did that realization hit for you that you're really no longer a practitioner, but you're a business owner?
Yeah.
When did that reality hit? Because that's another tough one.
I think so. I still see about 15 hours a week of patients, and I hope to be able to do that for a long period of time. I think that it keeps me really engaged on the floor. I know exactly what's going on with the gym. I see stuff, and it keeps me sharp. Like, I've had times where I ebb and flow and go lower, and it's like I like practicing. It's not maybe the most highest yield thing I could potentially do if I were focused on online and coursework, and I use my Instagram followership for that. But that being said, the answer to your question, when you feel, I would say that when I had 3 people working with me, and it was more than just 2 therapists, and it was like I had to kind come up with meeting topics and continue to really focus on the continuing education and the mentorship that I did with person number one. It's like I didn't want to leave behind the approaches that I took with the first and second hire that went really well and throw those out the window for the third and beyond. You know, I didn't want it, but it was like, it became a lot harder. There was a lot more time investment, more personalities to manage. I realized I couldn't give as much of myself to each individual person. And that was when I also, even though at that point we were still only in one facility, I designated my first hire, Wesley, to be my clinic director. I was like, I wanted to give him a role. And that's anything you read in business. Once you start to grow, it's like give people specific roles and responsibilities, so it's not just you and everybody below you. And I felt like that, like at that point, that those changes right there were what really kind of solidified to me, like I'm now an official like business owner, and this is much bigger than me. And the other side of it too is like, you know, people once people start coming to your business for more than just you. Like it was like people had been referred to Healthy Ball or physical therapy, but then they didn't even know that I was like the person that created it or anything. And it was like it's a cool and surreal thing to be separate from your business. And I think that's kind of the goal for a lot of people. So
well, then there's the other side, right? So the other side is you think you free up more time, but you end up finding out that there's never freeing up more time.
There's more shit to do
because there's more shit.
There's
more. Yes. Yeah. So it's with. This is a weird one to ask because I don't like to ask for details. So we'll just stay general. If you were to guess, how many times have you thought of yourself since you've hired people and started the business? F this, I'm done.
Yeah.
Not saying that you were going to do it, right? Because most of the time it's just F this, I'm done. But then immediately you're like, wait a minute, no, focus.
Yeah, I would say the biggest. I've never been tempted to like totally leave, but I would say that like I'm kind of, to be honest with you, I'm kind of at a point right now where it's like, do I want to grow anymore? Yeah, I don't think I do.
Yeah,
it's like my son just turned 1 in September. I'm entering a new phase of my life. And I'm kind of in my mind right now, like, fuck this. I don't want to grow anymore. I don't want any more responsibilities.
But doesn't that introduce the fear of if you don't grow, you die?
I know. That's what's hard. Yeah. When we went from 1 to 2 facilities, my business partners who own the performance side of it were separate businesses. I told them I didn't want to do it at first. I was like, look, my time investment, the second facility is 45 minutes away from my house without traffic. I mean, it can be an hour plus with traffic in the DC area. Our first facility is 25 minutes away. It's everything is different about it. It was a big time investment. And I was like, look, I could make more money doing online stuff than driving halfway across town to manage one person that I started there. I don't know. I mean, I think that it will come to a harder decision about like what you said, if you're not growing, then you're going in the opposite direction because you have to continue to be in front of people, remind them that you're there. You know? But it's a constant balancing act, and I'm hopeful that I can be a little bit on cruise control with the people that I have for a while. But I tell you, man, change has been the only constant in my career over the past 7 years.
Well, it's impossible to not have that. I mean, because the change is either good or bad. I mean, there's always something. There's always adversity, which I don't think enough business owners talk about, and it's really hard because we don't want to have specific examples to put out there because some could be legal. I mean, there's some things you just can't talk about, but there's and I've always said you need adversity for prosperity, but people have no idea how much adversity is actually involved. The one thing, while different business structures entirely, that I've learned is the more things that I can figure out how to do from my phone, the better.
Yeah.
Right. Not just because it's mobile, but now it's mobile anywhere. It's like something's going on, I can pull over and take care of it. And that's way different. So it's how much you can constrict the time that you have to actually be in one place, is huge because, I came to the understanding real fast 20 some years ago that my workday starts when I wake up and it stops when I go to bed.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's some breaks in between, and not saying that it's, you know, constantly 24/7, but it just never stops. It's just how it is. And it's interesting because nobody really believes me when I say this, and except people that have businesses, right? And then, you know, I'll throw out examples like the best. I got a hold of you last night at like 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
I mean, the only time you're going to get a hold of other people who really have businesses is either very early in the morning or late at night because they're too busy doing all their other shit.
And I knew that you had Swiss this weekend, so it was like I wasn't going to give you. I wasn't going to be like, hey Dave, let's. You know,
It's just how it works.
Like,
I mean,
my wife was like, "What are you guys going to talk about?" I was like, "Oh, well, he had a thing this
figure
weekend."
it out. You know, you just figure it
She's
out.
like, "You're flying to fucking Ohio and you don't even know what."
But I mean, there'll be other people that'll be like, you know, it's they and their traditional job is just 9 to 5, and they're like, good luck, man. If you're going to try to get a hold of somebody who's busy that has their own business and you think they're going to respond to anything that you're going to do from 9 to 5, well, good fucking luck. It's not going to happen. You know, it's just the reality of having a business. Now, there's a lot of I don't want to make it all sound bleak.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of pros. You know, the more mobile you can become, the more time you can spend with your child, you know, and that's a huge thing. You know, to be able to do that and to be able to grow. But I don't think people really get that balance. I really don't.
Yeah. No, it's tough because at the end of the day, you're the last in line. So stuff's going to kind of fall to you.
Oh yeah.
If anything happens, you know, and so, you know, whether it even be like a parent of a kid that's working with one of our therapists wants to get me involved because they're upset about something and they're CCing me on an email. I'm like, what do you want me to do about it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You know, it's like I'd send my kid to my colleague. I think they're great, and I'm sorry that things didn't end up perfectly the way you wanted them to. You know,
that changes over time too. I mean, that just changes over time because the longer you're in business and the more people that are in front of that person actually getting a hold of you. Yeah. You know, because I mean, there's customer service. There's like 3 layers before something gets a hold of me. It's almost, for me, you know, by the time something gets a hold of me, I can pretty much already guarantee it's not going to be a pleasant conversation. Yeah. Because it's already gone through 2 or 3 people who I've known have done everything in their power to try to make this right. So I'm led to only one conclusion if this keeps going, that this is a customer I'm going to be firing. You know, and it's going to be a short now I'll listen. I'm just saying that's just kind of how it all works. But, and there are other ways I can just go down a rabbit hole with this shit forever.
You're reminding me of a story. One of my first experiences with Elite FTS customer service, I bought a lifting belt from you guys. It was like an economy lifting belt, and it was super stiff. And I hit you guys up, and I just couldn't figure out how to break it in. And I understood that belts had to be really stiff, and I was told to put it in the dishwasher. So I did. And then it started to kind of fray. And long story short, you guys sent me a new belt, and it was just like fantastic customer service. And I think it was one of those experiences for me that made me kind of, that and all the free content and everything that you guys had made me just be like, this is a company that I believe in, want to support,
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, but the customer service thing is huge. And, you know, we just haven't grown to, and part of it is me being cheap also, but like,
it's a good
we
thing.
just haven't, but it's like we just haven't grown to a point where I'm able to insulate myself as much as maybe some other practice owners do or could. That being said, I think that it also has been one of our keys to success. And I don't know if that's just me being, you know, a little more self-important than I should be, but I do think that being involved has helped it to grow.
No, there definitely is something to be said about being approachable.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that hard to get a hold of. You know what I'm saying? There's the Instagram and now my Facebook is hacked. But anyhow, it's not that hard to actually get a hold of me if somebody had to get a hold of me. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, right? Because some people are completely insulated, and I think that's not good. Right. You know, no matter what the brand is or what the company is. Are there any topics or questions that you wanted to discuss that I didn't touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, we kind of dove into everything, you know. I think that I think just kind of the general understanding of the complexity of pain, and I thought that was a helpful thing to discuss and to kind of, pain science is obviously a deep rabbit hole, but I thought that was helpful. Just because lifters oftentimes are very structurally and mechanically based. A lot of us are until we learn anything new. And it's not that, I don't think that the goal of pain science is to remove that structural or mechanical approach, but it's just to understand there's more at play, and to also sometimes maybe temper down some of the catastrophization or the fear that's involved in pain. It's like, hey, look, pain's kind of a normal human experience that everybody has.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's.
Now you kind of tapped on earlier, how you're bigger into the functional part, but then you kind of stepped out of that, a little bit.
Yeah.
What's another thing that you were really big into that you stepped out of?
Well, I don't see a lot of foam rollers around here, Dave.
Yeah, there's here and there, but yeah. That was one.
Yeah. I would say that, when I was reading Cressy and Robertson articles, when Cressy was like in grad school and they were writing stuff on T Nation, and I was foam rolling every body part I had, and bringing my roller with me to the gym in my gym bag because gyms didn't have them then. And now it's like, I just think that now foam rollers are extremely popular, and I'm like, I don't need to waste my time on that thing. I'll do a few things here or there if I think that it's helpful or specific to my body. But I just think that foam rollers and foam rolling and soft tissue work really falls into that same category of the corrective stuff I was talking about, that it should be specific to you and what you need. And you don't need to just arbitrarily roll your glutes every day to be healthy. You don't need to, it's not like such a cut and dry thing that you need to do X amount of stretching or mobility to be healthy. I just think that it's just it's on a very individual basis and on a big spectrum.
How would you put in then just a warm up for a basic strength training session?
All the other factors play in. It's like I didn't anticipate how long it was going to take me to get here today. I didn't leave early enough. I had to go get my rental car, so that's why I didn't do any warm-ups before my deadlifts. Yeah. But it's like, so sometimes it's fine to just do that. But if I did that every single time and never did anything outside of that realm, I think I might get a little tighter and stiffer. So I still think it's on a very individual as-needed basis. Like when we were talking about deadlifting and the patient that might see me with back pain with deadlifting and they have a really stiff spine and they can't really extend and reverse their curvature in both directions, that person might need more spinal mobility, hamstring mobility, hip mobility type of work. If you're talking about the person that has a very low tolerance for getting outside of spinal position and that bothers them, maybe they just need to make their core strong as hell to stay in a better position. So it's like I still think that all of the mobility and functional stuff should be specifically applied, and that there's just not tremendous benefit by kind of arbitrarily throwing a bunch of shit against the wall.
No, I fully support that. The only thing that I would add is if it's individualized, and there's sometimes I might need an insane amount of stuff. Increased core temperature. I mean, a lot of things.
Totally.
Sometimes I don't even need that though, but sometimes it's all of that. But I also think that we need to be conditioned enough that in the situation like yours happens, you can still train, right? So if you become so dependent upon X, Y, and Z just to be able to do A, to me that's a problem, right? Not saying that you need to always do A, but because X, Y, and Z will become, 3 more things, and then because you adapt, so somewhat you have to control this adaptation. It's almost like you need to deload your warm.
Athletes have a degree of superstition involved with their warm-ups sometimes, and they think that they need to do all of these things and open up all these joints or activate all these muscles in order to have the best session possible. And I think that, like you said, deload from the warm-up a little bit, take different approaches to warming up, I think can actually be really helpful to make you more resilient in the long run.
It's weird with athletes though, because I like to look at things with this real weird critical eye, right? So no coach needed to even mention, right? So they're going to have this dynamic warm up. They're going to have all this warm up stuff to be able to do the shit that they need to do in the weight room, right? And it's all specific, it's all timed, it's all regulated, and it's all that. Game day comes. We're going to go out, we're going to warm up. Then we warm up, then we go sit in the locker room for a fucking hour while game day is going on and all this other stuff's going on. Then they go out in the field and sit on the bench if they're defense, if offense starts. They're an hour and a half away from their warm up.
Right.
It really mattered. You see?
Yeah. Totally.
You get what I'm saying? It's like if their specificity matters, then shouldn't you do your warm up an hour and a half before the actual session?
Yeah.
Or does it not?
Yeah.
But I guess all they're doing, though, is proving my point. You need to be able to have it so it's applicable to all situations.
But that's like powerlifting. I mean, you can take your warm-up reps before you go out onto the platform, but like
20 minutes between attempts.
Yeah, exactly. Or you might end up out there and then it's like your timing, like your hand, something was off with the timing and you still have to sit there for 15 minutes before like, stuff happens. And so I think that sometimes taking for those types of athletes that they have to rest and take these long periods of time. Like I think doing that in training is helpful.
Okay. All right. Here's a question that I know people are going to like this one. They're training in the gym, doesn't matter on what it is, what the body part is, pop. All right. Not a complete audible, but it could be a pull, it could be a tear, it could be a complete rupture. You don't know. What do they do the first 24 hours? So they pop something in the gym, they're depressed, they go home.
Yeah.
What should they do after that?
I think you just start to assess the severity or the degree of the injury.
How?
The natural stuff that we do. If you pop your shoulder, you're going to just be moving your shoulder through its motion, feeling things out. Maybe do like a push up on the wall, see how that feels. I think you start by just kind of figuring out what you can and can't do. And like I remind people when I'm experimenting with them and they come in, they don't want to hear the word experiment, but if you come in to see me and I'm a direct access practitioner, so you might not be coming with an MRI from a doctor. You might be coming, you did this injury in training yesterday. I'm going to start experimenting and doing stuff with you, but it's at such a low level that if you're doing this at home, to answer your question, if you're feeling things out at home, you can rest assured if you're doing something with very little force going through your joints and just feeling things out, you're probably not going to hurt yourself any worse. Now, if you go to in range and you apply force there, that might not feel good if it's a joint type of issue, like a chondral lesion flare up or an arthritic or whatever it may be. If it's a muscle or soft tissue type of thing, going to in range might not be that big of a deal. It depends. I mean, obviously it could be sometimes. And it definitely would if it's a two joint muscle like a hamstring or a quad and you really stretch that out. I mean, that would not feel good. But I would say first you kind of take inventory. If it's something where you have visible bruising, broken blood vessels under the skin, you can quantify that something happened, tissues were disrupted, I would say that it's probably a good idea to see a physician just to get a consultation and kind of see what's going on. Keep in mind that I tell people this all the time. If you're not going to get surgery or you're of the mindset that you want to work through something like this, and obviously you're not crippled, like you feel like that's an option. You blow your knee out playing football or you tear a tendon or something and it's just like off the bone, then I'm not going to rehab. You probably usually know early on, I'm not going to try to rehab this. But if it's something like your plantar fascia, like if it's something where you think to yourself, man, this hurts like shit, but this kind of feels like I don't necessarily need surgery. And I know that not everybody's equipped to make that determination, but if it's something like that, you don't need the MRI right away. Because the MRI is going to inform what we're going to do on the inside of the body. If we're going to stay outside of the body and do a movement-based intervention and maybe an injection of some sort, like you might not need that MRI right away. But the basic triage, you get injured doing something like this. You take the next 12 to 24 hours to kind of assess how you're feeling, then make the determination if it's at a point that you think you might need a higher level medical intervention, you book an appointment to see a physician. If you have a physical therapist or somebody like myself that you have worked with in the past or you know of in the area, reach out to them. Like I tell people all the time, like I know all the docs in the DC area. I'll tell you who to go to. and I'm going to be a much better referral source as to what doctor to go to than some random doctor that you go see.
Yeah.
Some random orthopedist that does every single body part for their surgical suite might not be the best person to see. You know, if you have a hip issue, and I'm pretty sure it's a hip labrum issue, and you felt a pop in the bottom of the squat, and you can't, and it feels like a hip pointer, and you can't, you're sitting in a chair and you can't lift your leg, I'm going to send you to the hip specialist doctor. So that's, I mean, I would say that the best resource, honestly, is a well-versed physical therapist. And I know that it's kind of self-fulfilling in terms of my answer, but we are, if trained correctly and practiced correctly, we should be kind of the jack of all trades in this world. You know, we should know the different docs in the area and who to go see if you do need to go see somebody. Maybe get you in a little bit quicker with a word of mouth if it's somebody that
I think that's a big thing there too, right? Because if they're good, they're going to be hard to get in to see.
Yeah.
Right. And if it is something that, you know, just thinking through things that I've had, you know, it's the same thing. It's like, how bad is it? What is my range of motion?
Right.
How much pain am I in?
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, how can I alleviate the pain, you know, and wait, you know, because I'll know more in a day. Like if it's swelling, I'm going to know if it's really swelling or not within a day.
Right.
And then, you know, if it is something that's, I don't know, you know, I want imaging, you know, ultrasound preferably.
Yeah.
Personally, I want that before it swells too much.
Yeah.
Because if it swells too much, then it gets a little rough to be able to see that. But the MRI is a completely different thing with that as well. Whereas the other extreme of that would be the people that, well, there's the hypochondriacs, so we'll just forget about that. But the ones on the other side that just think that they're going to fix it, and then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by, 4 weeks go by, then they don't do anything and they could have a detached tendon, they could have, you know, anything. But
the people that I see too late are typically there's like a big loss of range of motion, and they've kind of worked around it, or they're not fully aware of that.
They can regain that though, right?
Yeah.
And if they're consistent and adamant.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the injury and whatnot.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about shoulders right now, because shoulders is the one where you just get crushed with range of motion.
Yeah. I know that's my spine.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a good one. So, okay, I can't regain the range of motion, right? And I'm not going to believe anybody that says that I can, so you all can just piss off. I've been dealing with this since 2004. My goal is to not lose any more, right?
Yeah.
So that's where that mitigation kind of comes in from there. It kind of sounds like yours might be that same.
Yeah. You know, I have some range of motion loss, especially in external rotation. But my flexion, my overhead movement's always been decent. I don't load it heavy, but yeah, you know, I think that because shoulders, for whatever reason, I mean, our shoulder is obviously a ball and socket joint. It has tremendous degrees of freedom. It allows us to throw things from an overhead position and do things that no other animals on the planet can do. But at the same time, for whatever reason that those degrees of freedom occur, we also get frozen shoulder and this like kind of shrinking of the joint capsule and severe decreases in range of motion of the shoulder that you just don't see an analogous thing happen at really any other joint. Maybe the big toe. Big toes can get extremely stiff. But you know, it's like I get people sometimes that have baseball players, sometimes they get like crazy losses in range of motion in their shoulders and their elbows, and they just throw through it, and by the time they come see me, it's like, what were you doing? Who were you? You know. And so I think that any time that you get big range of motion loss, you should immediately see a therapist or somebody to
100%. 100%. How can people get a hold of you? How can they find you?
From this medium, I would say Instagram is probably the best way.
Okay.
Strength Coach Therapy is my Instagram. Yeah. My brick and mortar for like DC area people is Healthy Baller Physical Therapy. So yeah, you can find us online, healthyballer.com.
Awesome. Okay, I want to thank you for coming out. It's been my pleasure. This has been awesome. It's finally great to meet you after forever, you know, and we're done. That's kind of how I end the show. I have this professional we're done ending, but it seems to work.
Well, thanks, Dave.